Dora's room crosses different mediums and different centuries because it really is a feeling that just persists everywhere. It's this feeling of extreme desire and weakness and vulnerability that we're all so terrified to feel, but something that can ultimately lead to a much more emotionally rich life, even though it can be terrifying. Dora is Freud's most famous hysteric patient, and she was brought in by her father to be treated for her hysteria. And so really I'm using hysteria as a framework for understanding contemporary, modern desire. One of Freud's biggest successes was the fact that he acknowledged that he was a failure. One of the biggest, most important parts of the case is when he acknowledges the fact that Dora was not, in fact, heterosexual and that she was bisexual. And so him kind of realizing his own flaws opened up a lot of conversation for just the unknowable, just constantly being an unknown. And that's kind of where the room comes in. So the bed is an inversion of Freud's couch. I think the couch is kind of one of the most famous images of psychoanalysis. There's just this thing that you lie on and you're looking up at the ceiling and you're just talking. So this is really the unconscious of the couch, which is Dora's bed, and it's woven with yarn. The yarn evokes a sense of domesticity, it evokes a sense of femininity, and the color red has a sense of body horror. I was thinking about the film Carrie when I was making the bed. I was also thinking about Roman Polanski, the film Grave by Julie Ducournau. So a lot of these French horror films and American avant-garde films, they really draw on this sense of a fear of the woman's body, both her own and just an outside fear of it. And so this is a bust cast out of fabric and resin, and it's a more physical representation of that sense of bodily horror. So the case itself is actually called Fragments of an Analysis of Hysteria, and so I wanted to play with this idea of fragments. So I kind of took symbols from the case and fragments from the case also. One of the most important symbols is the jewelry box, which is in one of Dora's dreams. And so she has this dream where she's running outside of her room and she needs to take a jewelry box. And so this is that. It has a hand sticking out of it, kind of playing with the motif of body horror and just tactility and extreme desire, which is so tied to our senses and just what we touch. And also to evoke that are these pieces of fur, which I've placed in the box. The fur also is kind of a reference to surrealist imagery, and the surrealists drew heavily on the hysteric process of just intense feeling and not really thinking, so more feeling rather than analysis. The hand motif here, we have the hands sticking up, which is a different symbol. That goes back to Carrie again, where at the very end of the film, Carrie reaches out from the grave and her hand is just kind of frozen there, and it's extremely horrific. But that sense of horror is also tied to the feelings that we have when we're reading texts, and these are a collection of hysteric texts such as The Glass Menagerie, Bodily Harm by Margaret Atwood. There's Lolita, who is probably one of the most famous and notorious hysteric women that we know about in fiction. And then The Bell Jar, which was one of my favorite books when I was young. So it's kind of a collection of things and thinking about how text moves off the page. And so I've also played with the color red in marking text with red paint that are particularly affective to me. So thinking about how text moves off through emotion.